Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Wisdom from the Akashic podcast. My name is Susie, I am your host and I'm an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Today you're going to hear from another one of my grads, so this is another one of the Meet the Grads series, and today you're going to hear from Reverend Lucy, and she's going to laugh when she hears me call her that, but I think it's important to give her the title. She has definitely done a lot of spiritual work, as you will hear. She has been through a lot. She has done a lot of spiritual development, and she is now blessing others with her gifts. She's now sharing her beautiful magic with the world. In this episode, you'll hear about Lucy, her background, how she came across the Akashic Records, her training with me, and also, of course, what she is now offering to the world. As always, I will put Lucy's details in the show notes so that if you listen to this episode and you want to reach out to Lucy, connect with her, work with her, you can do that straight from this episode. So without further ado, here's the conversation with myself and Lucy, and I will see you all next week for the next episode. Hello and welcome to Lucy, to the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. I am super excited to have you here. I will ask you a question in a minute, but I just want to let the listeners know that Lucy and I are very good at talking for a long time about deep esoteric topics. So we are going to try and keep this shorter today, but if we do go off onto a couple of tangents, I apologize in advance. I just know that the conversations we've always had have been great. So Lucy, welcome. I would love you to share with the listeners, first of all, who you are, your spiritual journey, what's brought you here.
Thank you so much, Susie, for welcoming me here in your space. I have been with you for a while and worked with you and shared space with you. And I know how sacred it is for you to make the time. And so to be inviting this little container feels very humbling for me and very precious. So I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for all the work that you do in the world, truly, and how you show up. I always gush a little bit about you because finding a spiritual teacher and finding people that you feel truly aligned with can be sometimes very challenging and very difficult. And so when I met you, I just felt like, wow, I could just put my heart on my pillow kind of thing. I could just put my mind and rest it on the altar. And it just felt that I could finally rest a little bit more and open myself a little wider in shared space. So thank you for all that. I really appreciate it.
Very kind of you. And I will always say, you guys are the ones that do the work. You guys teach me so much. I learned so much from you all. So it's a mutual gush from me, my love.
Thank you. Yeah. So my spiritual journey, I find it interesting. I don't know that anybody else will, but I find it interesting because it is not linear at all, which is something that a lot of us probably can understand and relate to. It started with me coming into sort of the consciousness realization that I was different as a kid. I actually often wonder if I was a walk-in, and you can go to Susie's podcast about that, because I don't really remember much before the age of 10. I have mental and emotional impressions, but as far as recollecting memory, it's not really there. I feel that perhaps I even imagine memories just to make sense of my life at times. And there was a lot of trauma growing up. And so sometimes I was like, is it trauma? Is it walk-in? I wasn't quite sure, which is a great question to ask the Akashic Records. And I think for me, it was a little bit of both. I had the trauma, therefore there was a walk-in, right? So it was like to supercharge that soul, that little soul. And so what I remember vividly is around the age of 10, it's almost like I had this complete awakening. It's like I could see the world differently. I could remember things. And I had a sense of spiritual curiosity that was absolutely unquenchable. I'm originally from France and I grew up there, and Catholic is a big part of my story at the time, a lot of French history there. And so I tackled the religious side at first, and I just questioned everything. Things that I was being taught didn't make sense. It just didn't feel, it's all about revelations, and I didn't feel illuminated when I went to church, when I spoke to this priest, or when I did all the beautiful rituals there. I just didn't sense it in my being. And I remember one time asking the priest, you go make your confession every week, and just asking, okay, thank you for giving me ways to redeem myself, but how do I make sure I don't do this again? How do I move into a space of understanding and behaviors that I just don't keep failing myself? Because I had a high regards for moving into the world with perhaps at the time what I thought was morality. Really, what it was a sense of spiritual direction and a sense of alignment that I was seeking within myself. And luckily, I met my spiritual teacher at the age of 10. And that kind of came around in a sort of strange about way. It started off with because there was so much trauma in my home, there was a psychologist that helped me. But it turns out she was a spiritual master and just an incredible human being who just completely illuminated my path. And from 10 to 17, I had a direct contact with a spiritual teacher, which I am completely to this day know how blessed I am to have had that experience. I started off with weekly sessions, but eventually we all lived together. And so I had the privilege of learning at a very young age all of these different philosophy, all these different traditions. I started channeling at a very young age. And not only that, but when my teacher gave me, which is something that I do a lot in my work because it's literally from those fundamental years how I developed myself into this world, into this 3D reality, is a lot of our work wasn't just the practice and the tools and the mechanism of spirituality, but a lot of it was about making sure that my egoic self, and what I mean by egoic self, the self that is included as a whole, the perhaps personalization or identification. I know you've talked a lot about this before. The ego is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a part of it. So it was more about understanding the full self from a place of not creating attachment, not creating rejection and projection, truly understanding that the reality that we create is based on our interpretation and meaning. And so, how do we reframe that at the core of, let's say, the events, the beliefs? As we know, beliefs is a thought that is repeated over and over, right? So if we can catch the first thought before it becomes belief, and then we can choose to believe at something or not, then that kind of reshapes a little bit our inner workings. So that when we get older, as we know, it is really hard to work with that inner working and that shadow work, as we say. And so I learned those fundamentals very early on. My path was to be a channeler. That was going to be my path. Unfortunately, a lot of series of things and additional traumas happened and grief happened. And I was shipped to the United States and I had to reconfigure my whole life. And that kind of set me off into a different course. I think I had to really prioritize this 3D living to survive a little bit, the true understanding that there is this one level consciousness that encompasses all and that is here to support us, our love, that is here in service, truly, in communion. So that's my faith, if you will. I never lost that. I never lost my abilities to channel. It just, I had to move in different ways through the world. And as I moved through the world, I started building a little bit of those attachments. I started building a little bit of those little corners in the mind and that inner critic that would come in. The self talk were not so nice anymore. I started seeing things very differently. And so I've always been the person that no matter where I worked, no matter where I stood in the world, I was that person that everybody asked advice for. And so I did my work all the way through, but it took a while to get stabilized into this world, into this country that is very culturally different. And in doing so, I developed a little friend that truly took me a while, that felt like a little bit my enemy for a long time, but I've had to learn to befriend, which is the imposter syndrome. And that took me into a very interesting path. That path took me into all the education you could possibly have, right? Like I literally, and you can't see me, but I'm shooting up my arm, give it to me. Any degrees, any diploma. I did the traditional academic. I did every possible spiritual something because I was forgetting. I was forgetting who I was, what I had already within me. And it created such a dissonance, not just cognitive dissonance, but emotional, physical, spiritual. And I believe in non duality. I believe in the philosophy of oneness. And it was creating this conflict within me. The world was telling me in so many ways that I was there, but I had built up such a wall of safety and false sense of safety and security by showing up. I worked in corporate for many years and just trying to make do, but I never stopped. The beauty of that is I never ever stop. If you could see my library, this is like half of the books that I have. There is this thing that I often, I'm sure we've heard it somewhere else. I'm sure I didn't come up with it, but I tell always my client is like, there's this little whisper in your ear, right? It's a little whisper that just never truly goes away. And it's always, there's more. There is more. It's the good kind of, it's the whisper that tells you you're meant for something more. You're meant to do this. And sometimes you try to stuff it up and quiet it down because it's hard. It is still, we're very grateful. For example, like your podcast, right? You're bringing all this knowledge to people, and there's a lot of great individuals spreading the word, but it's still not a common thing, right? Because society is constantly telling us we're not enough. You go out into the world, you could stay home and you're being told you're not enough because whether you're on your computer, with the apps, with the AI, with everything that's going on, you always have to buy something. You always have to get something external. So you're never enough. But that whisper never dies. We can quiet it down to almost the lowest little volume, but it's always there. It's almost like a little gnawing. And I'm very familiar with, and I've been very close to the idea, and not to go a little too dark here, but I've met dance in a lot of ways through my life, whether it's experiencing in others, in my own life. I've had a near-death experience when I was 21. I've had a really good understanding at a very young age what death is. And so I befriended that throughout my life. And what I've come to is I'm not afraid of that. I'm only afraid of regrets. And so because of that, I just kept trying and trying, even though the imposter syndrome was coming in. And for me, ultimately, I had to get to a place of safety within my own self. And so I did. And I did a lot of work. I did a lot of regulation, whether it's the body, nervous system, emotional, not just intelligence, but regulation, very important. I went back to the basics, but also who was I in this moment? Who was I in this moment? And that's a question I'm asking myself all the time. I am that I am, right? But I am that I am right now is going to be different from the next moment because it's the part of me that is here with the filter of our human experience and the I am that is our essence. So that's the question we're asking constantly. And how is that aligned? And so eventually I got to a place where I worked enough with my imposter syndrome and realized the external component. Also realized a lot of past life trauma that was coming. There was a lot of stuff there too. Did a lot of healing on that in a lot of different ways. And I would say probably in 2014, I had really significant awakening. I think you're the same belief. I don't want to put words into my interpretation here, what I've heard you say, but if we're lucky enough, we'll have many awakenings. If we're lucky, you're right. It's not just one proof how you see on TV. It's if we're lucky enough, we'll have many of them. And a big significant one was in 2014, I had to go on medical leave because I was so burned out. All my adrenals were shot. Like my body just couldn't take it anymore. And I thought I was going to die. And again, I wasn't afraid of dying, but I was afraid of dying with regret. And I came out of that and I was like, never again. I will raise the volume up again and I will do what I need to do. And that's when I started basically doing my work. I did a lot incognito and undercover. I'm a trained spiritual counselor. I'm an interfaith minister, interspiritual counselor, and certified in coaching, positive psychology, all those things. And so I started there. But then I would channel in all my sessions. I think in that moment when I said yes, I wasn't sure where it was going to take me, but I knew that it was the right thing.
I love all of that. And thank you so much, Chef. There's so many questions I could ask just from all of that. So I'm sure we'll get to them. From all of that, you've obviously had a very intense, multiple awakenings, physical experience is very similar to my journey. So my question to you is, how did the Akashic Records find you through all of that?
Yeah. And it's really interesting because after I'm going to answer a reverse a little bit, which is after I did a training with you, which was not the first time, I realized that I had been channeling the Akashic record the whole time. I just wasn't aware of it. And I started having, in your training, I started having flashback memories when I was probably 12 and 13 years old. Back in the days, we used to go to the library, those things,
Yeah.
to do our homework and stuff and do research. And I remember I loved going to the library, which hint, hint, right? I love going to the library. And I would have these sort of episodes. That's all I called them. It was like, I would go to the library with the intent of doing my homework. And in France, like the homework is super intense, right? It's like literally another whole schoolwork. I'm sure in England it's probably the same. And I remember with the intent going there, doing my homework, but then I would be drawn to something else, a book, an article. I would pull out they would have binders of it. And I was never a history buff, but anything mythology or anything that was a storytelling of some degree. I would bring it out and then I would start writing. I'm still a pen and paper kind of girl, something about that. And I would start writing and I literally would blank out and I would like an hour would go by or I don't even know how long would go by, but I just knew that when I came back to a little bit, it's like my whole environment had changed. The people around me weren't the same. And I wish I still had those papers because I don't know what I did with them. But I would write all these things that I did not comprehend. Like at all. I didn't understand it. They were so far out of my human consciousness that I didn't understand it. And then a lot of people will call me, if that's not my preferred word, but it's a common word. A lot of people call me psychic, medium, and all that. I prefer channeler because I channel so many different dimensions. But people would say, you're a psychic, you're constantly knowing all these different things. What I realized is that was the Akashic Records the whole time. I did my training in 2010 with my seminary. And I became a little bit more acquainted with and also I'm a yoga teacher with a very traditional philosophy of yoga. And so Akash is part of that conversation, but also in seminary, that was part of the conversation. So I was really familiar with the woven of it all. But I remember I bought my first book of Akashic Records in 2014 when I was in that sabbatical. And I remember trying to do the prayer and I completely fell asleep. It's like, okay, maybe it's not for me. Maybe it is what it is. Then I did your training. I was like, oh, yes, I've been doing this whole time. What your training did is actually supercharge me because I go into trance channeling, which is not something I had experienced it unconsciously when I was a kid, but I did not experience it as an adult. And so for me, the interesting part, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I feel like you've perhaps even said that is because in your training, you offered us a beautiful prayer to tap into. And at this point, I still do it because I love rituals and I love stepping into all of that, but I don't even need it anymore. You just tune in, tap in, and poof, you're there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I was just going to say, it's very normal, first of all, for people who come to do the training to actually have been working with the Akashic Records unconsciously for a long time before. That was me as well. Before I learned anything about the Akashic Records, when I learned what they were, I was like, oh, okay, so this is this thing that I've been working with in my meditation practice, is how it worked with me. And what the training is for, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my job when I'm training and teaching people isn't teaching you how to do it. You can do it through meditation. You can do it through prayer. That's a one-line conversation. My job is supporting you, and my job is to help guide you and guide you through gaining confidence in what you're experiencing. And I'm the same as you. I love the ritual aspect of having the prayer. Most people, by the time they finish the class, don't need the prayer to tune in, but it's just a nice thing to have. Okay, this is the time that I'm going to spend. I'm going to open up and then I'm going to close down. But I think it's really interesting because what you're highlighting here for me, and I know for the listeners, is the Akashic Records choose how to work through you. So it's not that every person who comes to train with me is going to do it trans channeling. That is the right way for Lucy to channel. And the way that she works with them is going to be different to the way that I work with them and to the way that every other person that I've had on the Meet the Grad series works with them. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the Akashic Records, because it's not that I would say I'm not in a factory creating lots of mini-me's. The world doesn't need that. What the world needs is people really tuning in and tapping into their power and letting go of things like that imposter syndrome or the ego that's going to come in and try and block the way to then say, okay, actually, I can do this. And that's what the class is for you to be able to go, oh, I can do this. And you hear how different students are experiencing it and you go through that process. So I really love that process. I love the fact that it's just enhanced that natural ability that you have to channel. I love this conversation and I love where we're going with it, but I do want to hear more about you and your service now to the world, because I know you on many dimensional levels. We've worked together a lot and I know what a beautiful soul you are and just the amount you have to offer. You may think you have imposter syndrome, but I can see right through it and I can see the light that you bring to this world. So I'd love you to share with the listeners how you're in service now and how you're helping people on their spiritual journeys.
Thank you so much. I want to go back first to what you said about how you were perceiving what you were teaching. And I just want to say, as somebody who's taking your course, I want to reaffirm that your intention, as you describe it, is literally how I have received it. And I'm in contact with a lot of other grads, and that's how they've received it as well. Obviously, don't want to speak for them, but from my experience in the collective sharing, you have offered it's an offering. You're offering something for us to personally embody and feel out into our own experience, not just our lived experience, but who we are in that moment as we're receiving it. And one of the reasons I adore you so much is that it really truly resonates with me and how I see the world, because there's a lot of noise right now. We are in such need of support, and a lot of people are stepping forward, which is wonderful. But it's hard to step through the noise and figure out what it is that is needed on an individual and collective space and our own needs. A lot of times we think we know what we need, but we're not even quite sure. We just know that something is going on that is not quite right. And so having people like you, hopefully I can share how I see a little bit myself, is to really, you're your own guru, right? We talk about that. And that's really hard for us, right? I say a lot of times, whether I do a reading, and I'll go more to the specific of my services, but whether I do a reading or a session, whatever it is, I always say, take what serves you and leaves the rest, because it doesn't matter if I hear it or if I see it, because I'm claircognizant, clairvoyant, clairsentient. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, is what is it serving you in that moment? What feels more supportive, more beneficial? Again, going back to so much of the world is external, and we are enough. We are good enough. And something I didn't talk about is with our imposter syndrome, and I know you've talked a lot about this. I also have witch wounding that I know a lot of us do. And whether we have strong feminine energy, regardless of gender, a lot of us have experienced that either even in this lifetime, right? Or in past lifetime. And so we have a lot to work through. That's my point. So finding the person that, or the people that you really resonate with, again, gives you that little hug. So I just wanted to name that. In regards to my services, it's really interesting. Like I said, I have a lot of different pathway. The title of my work is called The Art of Alignment. And ultimately, what it does, it encompasses of a sense of well-being within oneself, a sense of full self-worth, and there are different pathways. I consider myself a little bit more of perhaps and I'm saying that very humbly because titles really don't matter, but I consider myself a little bit of an alchemist, if you will. You'll transform into the process of not just receiving information, but also integration. That is a very big, important part for me. I have what is called a multidimensional session, which is the first session that we do together. And it has everything. It has mind, body, spirit. It has to do with, there's a little bit of spiritual counseling, a little bit of coaching, there's different types of channeling, whether it's psychic, medium, or even Akashic. And the reason why this is a first session, even if you want to book other session, this is always going to be the first one because so I work in different dimensions, right? I work in different plane of existence and awareness, if you will. And a lot of times when I've worked with the Akashic Records, it's a little bit more high level information almost. And if we can think of like the different dimension, which I know you've talked a lot about in your podcast, and I'm not going to go from memory, but just from how I work, which is I think of myself as maybe spiritual counseling is a little bit 3D, coaching is 3 and 4, and then psychic mediumship is 4 and 5 level dimensions. For me, Akashic is a little bit more, although it's all encompassing, it's a little bit more, at least the way I work with them, let's say 7, 8, 9. And a lot of times, what I've recognized is that people are not necessarily ready to, it's not that they're not willing and it's not they don't have the intelligence because sometimes my clients are even too intelligent for their own good. But it's sometimes we as humans beings are not ready to hear this big idea or meet ourselves from that place of I almost want to say super consciousness, like higher self a lot of times. And sometimes in order to see the path, we need to take a little broom and just clear the path a little bit. There's been a little bit of bump, right? There's just been like a little bump. So that by the time we're there, we're like, oh, that makes sense. But it, sometimes being compounded with too much information can destabilize somebody and kind of traumatize either, let's say, witch wounding, imposter syndrome, or just freeze them. That's just been my experience. And so the multidimensional session just helps with a little bit of that inner working, if you will. Who do I need to be in order to receive, let's say, what is my soul purpose? That's a very big question that a lot of people come with. And if we can create new habits or make a decision clearly, or if we have self-doubt, or if we're stuck, to hear what our purpose is might not feel in alignment. It might feel almost too distant. And so for me, I like, and again, when I say me, all of the offerings that I have that have been created have been channeled through. And I just want to say that I'm using a lot more of the language that I and the me that I'm used to because I don't feel like it is the eyes of me. There is a we collaboration. I work with specific guides. I work with specific beings at different dimensions, and I work with Source, Akash, and my clients' higher self and their future self sometime, their past self, you know. So for a long time, I thought doing all these trainings and taking all these courses and classes and all these degrees, I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, I see people thriving, go-getters, and I was like, what's wrong with me? And then I realized, oh, too many pebbles on my pathway. And I do this multidimensional session to reset a little bit. So I do different offerings. Akashic reading is one of the offerings. I also do Akashic clearing, which I love. Also a medical medium. So it just like, it all supercharges everything. Yeah. And then one of the things that I've recognized over the years is I've either too intensified into the 3D and become stuck into the 3D, or went too spiritual. And I needed to understand the grounding element. And so I am, and I was a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher for a really long time. And so I offer that as well, because it's a good way to get grounded into this reality, but opening to source and opening to truth, to our higher self, if you will. And I don't like a higher self seems like the better version. It's more a true self, right?
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And what you recognized and this offering of this multidimensional session is one of the reasons that I predominantly work on mentorship now, because in mentorship, I'm able to really spend time with people. Yes, we do the Akashic readings. Yes, we do the clearings. Yes, we do soul retrievals, but it's more about that fuller picture. And as you say, coming in and asking what your soul purpose is, if actually at this moment in time, the thing you really need to work on is your money blocks. We need to work on the money blocks first. And okay, let's look at what's the priority right now. So that's certainly how I've shaped my business as I've gone through, because I, like you, want people to get the best out of the Akashic Records, I want them to have the mind-blowing experiences that you and I have had over the years with being able to get this beautiful divine guidance. What type of person is it that you predominantly work with? When I say that, what I mean is if a listener is listening to this and they're hearing you talk and, you know, that magnetic center's firing up and they're like, oh, I love what Lucy's saying. What type of person in respect of where are they at on their spiritual journey? What do they want to gain from their spiritual journey? The problems that they're having and how you're helping them.
I love how psychic you are. I know you don't call yourself psychic, but you always are, because it's like you literally describe my audience in asking the question like a spiritual seeker. So it's really funny. I just adore you so much. It's very interesting because a lot of people will come to me with different questions or different desires. That's a good way of putting it. But ultimately, they're all seeking that spiritual journey. That's really what they're truly seeking. You don't just show up at my door, like metaphorically, if you just want to know what the lottery tickets are, right? It's just I'm just not your person. Having said that, I think that a lot of times, and this is why the multidimensional session is good, because we can talk about a clear agenda. I think that's really important. What is the intention? What is the expectation? How do we get there? And again, going back to that, there's information and integration, very different things. A lot of people do very well in information. Some people do great integration, but the combination is really the winning combo for me. If I were to say, so I work a lot with the heroine journey or the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, and I've adjusted it in my own, again, not mine, spirit's own way. And a lot of people that I think for me, primarily people that are stuck, people that feel that there is so much more to life. I often describe, so my undergrad was in social work. And I realized that I didn't want to go to that path because, or even in my ministry, there's a lot of people, if you can think of a neutral line as our state of being, it's zero. You're not happy and you're not depressed. In my social work or in my ministry, I got a lot of people that were below the line, that just had a lot of really heavy things that they were working through. And I realized that it's not that I can't do it. It's just that it doesn't illuminate my spirit to do that work. There's so many phenomenal therapists, social workers. I don't need to be in that space. I know when to remove myself. And as a matter of fact, I want to talk about ethics for a moment. That's really important to me, is that the people that do this work, we're not the answer to everything. And that we need to be able to refer out. We need to know how to stay in our lane. So I'm in recovery 18 years for alcoholism, and going to see a psychic at that time, that's not what's going to help. 18 years ago, I had to find a group of people that got sober and did that work, right? And so we have to be able to refer out. Can support them in a way to guide them? Sure, we can ask their spirit, but that's not where the work is. So I think that's very important too. And I get very structured around that. I have people, I work with therapists that I refer out, and they actually refer me too. We do like cross referral, which is really great. But as far as people that I work with, where I find perhaps the most thriving work is people that are at that zero line. They're not depressed and not happy. They know there's something so much more and they want to thrive. And again, it's not to say, listen, I get some depression. I have a lot of grief that I'm still working through. And so obviously I go below the line and I know how to manage that. But I'm my own grief therapist, right? And just to say that. And so people that are seekers, that they're not just seekers, but they're curious. They have this innate curiosity to know more, to have the awareness that what they're seeing in the world either doesn't make sense or doesn't fulfill all of what's within them. And then also people that are learners, people that want to learn, right? Because there's the seeking, the curiosity, and the learning. Again, if you're just wanting information, there's a lot of really good people out there doing that work. But if you really want to integrate and essentially transform into that aligning to your true self, then those three elements are just those really good characteristics so if you're naturally curious, if you want to learn something about your life, and it's not I'm not teaching philosophy, although I'm not teaching philosophy and I did it for a long time. It's more about what is the philosophy of you?
Yeah, I love that. And what's that essence about? And
Yeah.
how can you step forward into your sovereignty?
Oh, yes.
That's the journey. And it is, as you said, stepping into your sovereignty is actually just the remembering
That's
who you
right.
truly are before the noise, before the world put all its pressures and projections onto who it thought you should be and all of that stuff. It's connecting back to that. And whether that's through mediumship work, through counseling, through whatever it is that you need to get back to that part, that's what you need. And I love the fact that you talk about the ethics of it, because as I'm a big fan of outsourcing to other practitioners as and when the time is. And I think to me, that's a sign of someone who knows where they can help and how they can help and where someone else is better placed. And I don't see there being anything wrong with that. I think that's a beautiful thing. I have shamanic practitioners. If somebody comes to me and they have lots and lots of different astral things going on, I'm not a shamanic practitioner, but I know some great ones and I will always refer out. And I think that it's not about that we all have to stay pigeonholed or that we all have to stay in boxes, but we do have to understand that we're looking at individuals holistically. For when you're a spiritual practitioner, you're looking at the whole picture of that person. And if they need some support, like you said, if they were going through the struggles of addiction, then an Akashic reading, for example, wouldn't be the most appropriate thing for. But yes, there may be some stuff that we can do in clearing in respect of addiction, past life stuff, all of that stuff. And there will come a time where all of that is really helpful. But if they're just in the throes of it, then our job is to say, actually, this is the type of help you need to go and get initially, rather than going into the kind of higher level spiritual stuff. So I do want to touch on something that you just mentioned, because lots of the listeners won't know what it is. And I do think it's an amazing tool. And I think it's a place where even if you're at the very start of your spiritual awakening journey, understanding the hero's journey and the heroine's journey is going to help you wherever you're at. And there are differences between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And I just wonder if you want to share with the listeners a little bit of an overview. And I know these are both complex journeys, but a little bit of an overview as to your understanding of them, how the understanding has helped you and how it's also helped you support others. Because I know specifically with the heroine's journey, there's a lot of descent. There's a lot of going into the shadow, into the darkness, the death process, the grief process. All of that is very strong and transformative in the heroine's journey. Not easy work to do, but if anything was ever going to alchemize you, it's going into that descent that is offered through that work. So if you just want to share with the listeners a little bit about your journey with the heroes and the heroine's journey and how it's helped you along the way.
Yes, I definitely will. And thank you. Always great questions. I'm pausing because I'm being drawn to go back a little bit to what we were just talking about, the ethics of it all. And I think it's going to weave in very beautifully into your question, which is what we do is a very intimate work.
Yes.
What we do needs to be respected, and working with you and being with you. And I believe in my spirit that you have the same notion, but I'm going to speak from my experience. I have a deep reverence to working with the Akash. And I always get so emotional. Like whether it's Akash, all the light beings through the veil, I have a beautiful altar that is in my home, that is in my place where I work, in my healing space. But I carry that altar with me everywhere that I go. The words that I speak, the way I show up, the way I commune with the world in my relations, from getting gas to grocery store, whatever. Like the altar is always there. Akash is always there. The light beings are always there. And so when I am meeting with a client, there is this deep reverence to all of that, to their support team, right? Because a lot of time people want to know, who is my spirit guide, right? Very common question. And for me, it's like we go through a process where let's figure it out together. I get the answer. They tell me, but it's about, you know how it is. When you learn to do something and discover something yourself, you have such a greater understanding of that you can imprint it in yourself. So for me, the ethics around that is also knowing that I recognize that people showing up as we create, my clients and I create a container together in sessions, there is deep reverence to all of it. And so
Mhm.
showing up from that place of humility and showing up from that place of deep respect, I think falls again into the understanding of ethics, right? Like I don't book my session back to back. I have time before and I have time after because I do preparation. And then after I make sure that I clear out before my next client so that I don't bring that into the next place, right? So I definitely there is an understanding that all the things that we do as we show up in those spaces has a value system that I want to trust wholeheartedly. And I want my clients to trust wholeheartedly with intimacy and confidentiality as well. And so, essentially, to wrap up this idea, is that when I meet with a client, and assess where they are, where they want to go, and talk about the agenda and just again clean that pathway a little bit. There's usually an understanding where people are on the heroine's journey. And I do work with a lot of women or very much women identifying individual or very people that have a very strong feminine energy. And it's just something that just naturally happens regardless of gender. That's just what seems to come my way. And I think that this because I've perhaps have had to have my own heroine's journey, talking about the external and how that can certainly affect us as individual. And every culture, every background will have their own set of sort of bias and judgment and isms or experiences. But as an individual, I've had to work a lot with understanding what it is like to be women in this world with these gifts. And I just want to say with gifts, I don't often use that word because it's a little misguided. It's almost like the talents and the geniuses. There's this idea that it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something, right? So we all have gifts. I'm not special by any means. I just spent a really long time developing them. I just spent a really long journey. And it does take practice and dedication, but we all possess that. And as a matter of fact, going a little tangent, we all have experience. And I feel very confident naming that whether we know it or not, our intuition is there. It's always guiding us, always talking to us, right? And my job is just to highlight that, supercharge us so they can do this work themselves. But in order to do that, a lot of us on this journey has to like remove all the stuff that's blocking us, right? And that's part of it. I remember one of my taglines back in the days was, it's not about doing more, it's about doing less.
Always.
Right. And so part of that journey is what have we attached? What have we adopted? What have we personalized? What have we identified with that's actually blocking us from our true self? Right. So there's a lot of unfolding, unpeeling. And I believe the heroine's journey specifically is about that. It's about literally, I remember back in the days, this is probably 20 years ago, I did this practice where I literally wrote all these things about myself because my individual mantra has always been, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Right. And I literally wrote all these things down and I put it all on the table and I just threw it on the table, just for my whole self. And I went through each piece of paper to, oh, this doesn't fit anymore. Oh, I'm not sure about that. I think there's a different version or there's a different, an up leveling, if you will. There's a different thing. And so I only picked up the few things that I really felt that this is who I truly am, that I want to embody moving forward. And a lot of time on the heroine's journey, I work with people who, because as you know, the whole concept of my work is remembering our true self, right? Remembering who we are at the essence. And a lot of times people seem to be drawn to, so I've done some the spirit, Akash, working a lot of different ways with me that I never thought I would do, but I've done a lot of quantum jumping, quantum healing, and things like that. And a lot of that is you move into different timelines to either you bring a part of yourself that is on a different timeline into your current self, or you quantum jump into your future self. And sometimes it's about almost a soul retrieval, right? It's almost about bringing that in. And so part of that, a lot of loss happens. A lot of loss. We spend a lot of time trying to create ourselves. A lot of people that are on a spiritual journey, whether they're beginners or advanced, they spend a long time defining who they are in the world. Like I said, I work with a lot of people that have really high IQs and people that I know have high IQ that have never been tested, just whatever that means, whatever that framework. But a lot of people have spent a lot of time identifying two different things. And now they are being asked by that little whisper to perhaps be something more. And what does that mean? Do I have to keep working harder? Do I have to? And so in reality, it's about removing the self that's kept us in prison in that little box. And there is a sense of adventure that can feel very enthusiastic, that can feel very exhilarating at times, but then there is often the wall that hits. I've worked with a lot of people, including myself, who they are on their path. The initial can be very exciting, and then right away, like this deep depression settles in. And a lot of it is because a part of us are being asked within ourselves to grieve that old self. And I'm on this big grief journey, and it's been a couple years. And I said to you right before the podcast, I said, I never thought I would work in grief. I don't want to do that work. And then I'm doing a grief workshop coming up, and literally the grief workshop how I created, it's like a full prong step. And it starts with loss, identifying what loss is. And then there's transmutation, which is really about when there is a sense of loss, there's a lot of that inner critic that comes in, and there's a secondary losses. There's a lot of the world is completely different. And from my experience with it is that, and I work with a lot of, I am in the grief world, and I often hear it's everything is different, and it really messes up with your mind. It really does. The loss really, everything you thought you knew, you no longer know. And so the inner critic and just the doubt comes in, the confusion comes in. And once you understand a little bit what loss, you understand what the transmutation is, to understand like what those, let's say, quote unquote, negative thought, negative emotion, negative behaviors are, and how do you shift that into a whole different experience? Because grief is not the end of something. It's just, it's a cycle. It starts something that reshifts you and is asking you to look from a different perspective. So transmutation is about perspective, if you will. And then we go into transformation. Now that I'm shifting that perspective, what does it feel like to look from that lens? Let's look at it through that lens. Let's create new meaning, new with a higher understanding now. And transfiguration, which is all about bringing that divine self within ourselves. It's like, now that I've transmuted, transformed, what does it mean to be that true self? And how do I show up from that place? And I realized that doing that grief workshop is, oh, that's the work. That's a heroine's journey that I've been working with my clients for years. In that pride, instead of loss, perhaps it's change, or it is just lost itself. Also, what happens is there are different questions that we are asking ourselves, right? So the dark night of the soul can take many different shapes, different forms, every step of the way. I think I signed up for a lot in this lifetime. My soul contract is really long, but I've experienced the death of the self many times. I've had many dark nights of the soul. And because for me, the darkness is where the light is the most potent. This is where I get the most, I think. And I do believe that transformation or evolution or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't have to be through pain. It can come through insight as well. I just think that insight perhaps has not been sufficient for me, and I've signed up for some painful experience. I don't believe that's everyone. But I do believe that there is this sort of, whenever you're on that journey, whenever you're asking for more, that is the unseen, there has a sort of, for me, that cycle of transmutation, transformation, and transfiguration. At the same time, we're having to break through that veil of illusion. And so there's a shattering that happens that sometimes can only be done in the darkness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what you're highlighting is the importance of honoring all of the steps on the spiritual journey and honoring all of the aspects of it. Because I think you and I have had conversations about this before, that in the kind of online spiritual community, it's all love and light, and we'll just skip straight to the transfiguration. And that just isn't how the spiritual journey goes. When you're truly on it and in it, there are going to be, I always say, a dark night of the soul is such a lie because it's so much longer than a night, and there's so many more than one. It's the many dark weeks, months, an experience. But if you honor that part, and if you allow those parts of you that are no longer serving you, it's not that they're bad, it's just you're growing, you're evolving, you're changing. If you allow them to go and you grieve them and you grieve through that process, you're going to expand on the other side, but you can't rush it. And I think that's really important, because I think when you get put into the darkness, when you go on the descent, when you go into a phase of contraction, a lot of people can really freak out, and they can say, oh, I want to feel high vibes and I shouldn't be feeling this because I'm supposed to be high vibe only, and all of this nonsense that's just perpetuated in the online community. Whereas actually that's deep, rich work that's being done there, and allowing yourself to experience the transmutation and to experience the process of alchemy that's taking place within you at that time, of letting things go, allowing new things to come forward, and losing yourself in the process. It's such powerful work. And it's such beautiful, amazing work. And it's what your soul signed up for. Your soul came here to evolve and grow. And unfortunately, as humans, we only need to take one look at the world at the moment. As humans, we only tend to learn and grow and evolve through really difficult things. We tend to need things to awaken us. We tend to need things to come and shake our world a little bit, so that we do start asking those questions of the who am I? What am I here for? What's my journey? So I think it's really important and really beautiful that you've shared how important that part of the work is. And I never want anyone to feel like if they are going through a grieving experience, or if they do feel like they've gone into the darkness or into the descent, they've done anything wrong, or that they haven't thought positively enough or said affirmations in the mirror or any of this other stuff. It's actually part of the process, and it's being able to be guided through that is beautiful. And I will speak to Lucy and her ability to do grief work, because I've worked with Lucy one-on-one and I've seen her do her work. And if I said to Lucy before the podcast, and I want to reiterate it here to the listeners, if I was going through a period of grief, Lucy would be the person I would go to, because never have I met someone who is able to truly go through those stages of grief and give herself the space and the grace and the compassion and love that is needed to give yourself through that process. She's exactly the person I would go to. So if you are someone who's listening who this work sounds of interest to you, please do not hesitate to sign up for it. I'll put links in the show notes, but I know that Lucy will be an awesome guide through that process.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to that ability. I think it's very humbling to say that, because you know what my grief is, and it's pretty significant. And I have complex grief, right? There is a humbling aspect that often surprises me, because in the darkness of grief and just the dark night of the soul, whatever lost level you are, there's a great mystery there. And that great mystery is very personal, how it is revealed to each one of us. But it is there. And there is magic with a K in it. There is a pure magic in there. And in sober spaces, we say, don't quit until the miracles happen. And they also say there's something about the gift of desperation, being so desperate that you reach out for more than you could ever possibly. And that's the great mystery, is that when you're so deep into the pain, there's nowhere else to go but really start praying, right? And I don't mean religion, I just mean like God, goddesses, the creatrix, my spirit guide, my being, my creatures, and my true self. I need your guidance. Show me the path. And I was going to go into another tangent. I'm not going to, because I was going to talk about AI for a second, but we'll have another conversation about that.
We'll do that another day.
Another day. Stay within your own internal guiding system. Everyone is potent with so much wisdom within them. I'm only here to help reveal that. That is it. You all have it. We all have it. It is innate for all of us. In my personal experience, there is nobody special. We just get there when we get there. And the thing is that one of the things we didn't talk too much about yet is on that heroine's journey, we are not alone. We talked about that. We're not alone. And we get to meet what they call our allies, our friends, our support, our guides. And it's that great mystery that can lead us to it. Again, people can have, I don't think everybody needs to have traumatic experience or painful one. People can have beautiful insight and revelation happens to them, right? But either way, there's always going to be the death of a self and a self, right? Either way, your soul contract kind of dictates a little bit what you've chosen, where you want to be. And I certainly have had a long list. I know you've had a list. And, what keeps me going is that faith. I really have strong faith and beliefs into the beauty of Akash and source and myself. I think that is something that why I talk so much about ethics is because trust is important. It's important to trust oneself. Somebody actually did another interview yesterday and somebody asked me, how do you choose somebody to help you? And I said, we all have this innate intuition, a sense of self, that something feels right or doesn't feel right. We just choose not to listen. Never reason. There are many times I didn't, right? But if we can honor that, the more we honor it, the more it shows up for us.
Yes. The louder it gets, the louder the nudges get. And I think that's really important to know because one of the things that I share here on the podcast all the time is we all have this internal technology and this internal technology is connected to your soul. It's connected to your guide. It's connected to source. It's connected to everything. And all of those other beings that you might not be able to see or you might not be able to connect with yet, they're all here trying to help you and they're all trying to guide you. Your only responsibility is to tune into that internal technology and start listening, first of all, and then acting. And that's the hard part because lots of people get the nudge, but then it doesn't quite make sense to the logical brain. They'll feel that pull to go in a certain direction. And then that's where the trust and surrender comes in. And a lot of the time, what I find is that people have to go into the darkness because they've been getting the nudges, they've been getting the intuitive hits. And this was certainly true for me. And I wasn't listening. And so for me to listen, I had to be put into the darkness, into the depths, into the descent, so that I had no choice but to surrender and say, okay, divine, how do you want to work through me? So for some people like me, that's how we have to go. For some people, they may trust their intuition a lot earlier, but it's all to do with where they're at and what they have to experience. But I think it is very important for people to know that they do have all of that within them. And our jobs as practitioners is to help them remember that. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. And also I find it often when I work with people, whomever shows up with them, whether it's Akash, their guides or their whoever shows up to work with them in that session, they're so eager. My first session, there's literally, and I always ask my clients to have a pen and paper because there's so much information. They've been wanting this. They are here. That's what soul contract. They're here for that. And so they're like, finally, talking. And they have a lot of like tools and tips and ways to, a lot of times in the spiritual world, they talk about get to this place of ascension. But how do you get there? What does it look like? And when you start working with them, it's, let me tell you, from where you are, this is what you can do. And that's also very helpful because it grounds us into, I am much more empowered than I realize that I am.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because one of the things I say to people when it's their first time having a reading with me, I'm like, be ready. Okay. Right. Because you just know how excited the guides are. I think sometimes people say, oh my God, my guide's going to want to speak to me. You can never underestimate how delighted they are to connect with you and to finally be able to give you that guidance because they will have been trying to get guidance to you. And a lot of the time, especially in the Akashic work, people will say, I had that intuitively. I knew that intuitively, but hearing it through the Akashic Records through a person who does not know them just gives them that trust in, that intuitive nudge that I got was correct. So I just have one more question for you before you go. One of the things I ask all of the guests is just for one practice that they love, their kind of go-to practice that they would rely on. Because again, in the online spiritual community, there's lots of very complicated, very time-consuming morning routines, evening routines. By the time you've done your morning routine, you're into your evening routine with some of them. And what I like to share with listeners is just one practice that people who are on the journey and have done deep work with themselves, like yourself, that is a go-to practice for them, regardless of what's going on in their life.
Yeah. Obviously, my mind goes into 10 different ways. There's so many things coming in, but I'm going to go with the first thing. The first thing that came to mind is a simple practice of self-empowerment through intuition development. And it's literally start a little journal. It could be on your phone, right? It could be on the notes. It could be on your phone. Every time you get that little hint, and this is how I think of like intuition, is the thought that comes out of nowhere. It's like an inspiration. It's something that kind of comes through almost a little different pathway than your normal thinking, but it is in your own voice. It is in your own thinking spirit, if you will. But it's something, let's say you're driving and all of a sudden you're like, make a left. That's intuition. It's like you're literally looking at an app that tells you where to go and it's telling you to right, but you hear that. Start a little journal of like when you hear that and what did you do next? My suggestion is make the left, see what happens. Then once you make the left, see what happens. Did you end up seeing the blooming cherry blossom tree that is the first day of spring and all of a sudden your heart warms up and you're like, it shifted your whole emotional sense of well-being. Now you're on your way somewhere with all of that yumminess in your emotion. If you make a left and see, oh, you could see in the back of your mirror that there was like a bunch of lights and there was a bunch of traffic. Oh, now I just saved 10 minutes from the traffic. Pay attention to that, right? Attention to intuition, how it shows up. Is it that you listen to, all of a sudden you never listen to radio and all of a sudden you want to listen to radio and it's a song that you needed in that moment, right? Write it down. That telepathy intuition, you're thinking of somebody and then that person calls you, right? You go to the store and all of a sudden you're picking up the wrong thing and you hear, oh, let's look at what it said. Let's look at the reading. It's like, oh, it has that ingredient that I was looking for, right? And start noticing, first of all, write all those little things down. Have your own little book of shadows, as they say, right? Write all those things down. See what happens when you do it and how that makes you feel. And then just keep writing down. You don't need to look at it. You don't need, just keep writing down. And you're developing that muscle. Because when self-doubt comes in, you go back to that book and you reread it and you're like, oh yeah, no, I have it. I have it within me.
I love that. And I think it's a really little practical tool that people can use, because I think sometimes that people think to develop their intuition and to tune into their internal technology, that it has to be done in a class or a course. There's nothing wrong with classes and courses. You and I both teach things, but actually the more you're doing that day-to-day practice, that day-to-day acknowledgement of, oh, there's some information coming here, I'm just going to go with it, the more you're going to be able to develop trust, the more you're going to be able to surrender, and the stronger that intuition gets, to the point where you'll have such a strong intuitive yes or no when it comes to making a decision that to choose the no is just going to be crazy. It's, this is my entire being is on fire to go in this direction, even though it doesn't make sense, even though I know because I've been doing this work that I'm held, I'm supported, I'm guided by the divine throughout the journey.
Yeah. And also there are a lot of people that define what intuition looks like and supposed to be like. And I'm going to do at some point a workshop on that. But one of the things that I really encourage people is, how does your intuition speaks to you?
Yes,
right?
very important. Because I have a lot of this with students who come to do level 1, where they say, I don't get any visions, I'm not clairvoyant, so can I still do the class? And it's like, there's many other ways that you're going to receive information. Intuition's exactly the same, and it's being open to the different ways that it shows up. And also, I think with the intuition, it's important to recognize that it can be cyclical. Intuition is a very feminine energy force, and there are going to be times where you're going to feel like all of your spidey senses are on, and you're getting all of this amazing stuff and your intuition's really strong, and then there are going to be times where it doesn't feel like that, and that doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that your guides have fallen out with you. It just means that there's something that's integrating, there's something that's happening internally, and that's where the focus needs to be. I love that little practice. Thank you so much, Lucy, for being my guest. As I said, I will definitely be requesting you to come back. We can maybe talk a little bit about AI and transhumanism if you like. I'm sure the listeners would love to have a
Yes.
conversation on all
Yes.
of that. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for doing the work that you do in this world. And I know there will be some listeners who will reach out, connect with Lucy. I will, of course, put all of Lucy's details and how to get hold of her in the show notes. Definitely give her a follow on socials and check out the work that she does. You will be in very good hands with Lucy.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been truly a pleasure as always. I love sharing space with you. And it's always like we could talk for hours.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolute pleasure.